The story is about Ethan, a single black father struggling to raise his young, sick son while facing financial and job related pressures. One day, on his way to work, he witnesses a car plunge into a river with a little girl trapped inside. Knowing he might lose his job, Ethan decides to dive into the freezing water and saves the girl from a near death situation. His brave act changes his life forever as the girl's wealthy family not only pays for his son's medical treatment, but also helps him rebuild his life. Ethan becomes a symbol of kindness, fatherly love, and resilience, inspiring thousands of others. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching this video. We hope this meaningful story touches your heart. Don't forget to like and leave a comment to share your thoughts with us. Now, let's dive into the story. The alarm clock buzzed loudly on the bedside table, shattering the fragile silence of Ethan's small apartment. The old clock, much like everything else in his life, had seen better days. Worn and battered, it barely worked, but it did its job. Ethan groaned softly, rubbed his eyes, and sat up. His body ached as if the weight of the entire world rested on his shoulders. He turned his head to look at the small bed in the corner of the room. Liam, his 8-year-old son, was still fast asleep. His small face looked peaceful, a stark contrast to the harsh reality the two of them faced every day. Ethan sighed quietly, reminding himself that no matter how tough life got, he couldn't let Liam see him falter. Stepping into the kitchen, Ethan opened the fridge. There was nothing but a bit of milk nearing its expiration date and a few slices of stale bread. He silently poured some milk into a glass, carefully leaving enough for Liam's breakfast. Holding the glass in his hand, he didn't drink right away. Instead, he stood by the kitchen window, watching the dim morning light cast a pale glow over the old buildings outside. Another day was beginning. It was Monday. And like every Monday, Ethan had to make it to work at Mr. Harris's warehouse, run by a man infamous for his strictness. Mr. Harris often said, "Punctuality isn't a requirement, it's the law." Ethan had already lost wages several times for being late, but he didn't have any other choice. His trips to the hospital for Liam left him drained of energy and time. "Dad." A soft voice pulled Ethan from his thoughts. Liam was awake, his sad eyes still shining with an unwavering trust in his father. Ethan smiled, doing his best to appear optimistic. "Good morning, kiddo. I've got your breakfast ready for you." Ethan helped Liam get dressed and prepared a simple breakfast, just like every other day. Their small kitchen, with its worn-out appliances and a chipped wooden table, was where father and son shared their rare moments together. "Are you feeling okay today?" Ethan asked as he sat down next to Liam. His eyes scanned his son's small face, searching for any signs of exhaustion. "I'm fine, Dad," Liam replied with a faint smile. But Ethan knew his son too well. Behind that smile was pain Liam never complained about. Ethan nodded, though unease gnawed at him. He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was nearly 7 a.m. "I have to get to work now. Remember to rest, take your medicine, and call me if you need anything, okay?" "Yes, Dad. Be careful," Liam said, waving as Ethan hurriedly slipped on his worn-out coat and stepped outside. Outside, it was a bitterly cold morning. A thick fog blanketed the small street, and the weak sunlight barely melted the thin layer of frost. Ethan walked briskly past old houses, his thoughts already on the grueling hours ahead. The warehouse where Mr. Harris worked was nearly 2 miles away, and Ethan had to walk since he couldn't afford to fix his broken car. Mr. Harris's words echoed in Ethan's mind. "If you're late again, I'll dock an entire week's pay, or worse, fire you. Do you understand?" Ethan clenched his teeth and quickened his pace. But just as he approached a major intersection, a loud crash shattered the silence. The screech of brakes, followed by a heavy splash, pierced the cold air. In front of him was a horrifying scene. A car had veered off the road and was sinking fast into the freezing river at the bottom of the hill. Ethan froze for a moment, but the panicked screams of a man on the riverbank jolted him back. "I got out, but my daughter, my daughter is still in the car." The man, soaked and trembling, pointed toward the water. "Please, someone help her. Somebody. Please." The river was dark and icy. The car was sinking quickly, and inside, a little girl, about 6 or 7, pounded on the window, screaming in terror. Passersby gathered but stayed rooted to the spot, unwilling to face the cold and danger. Ethan stood there, his feet like lead. Inside his mind, a fierce battle raged. If he jumped in, he would be late for work. And with Mr. Harris, being late this time meant losing his job. No money for Liam's medicine, no money for rent, no money for anything. But if he did nothing, who would save the girl? Precious seconds ticked by, and Ethan couldn't just stand there. He clenched his fists, glancing around at the crowd, but every pair of eyes avoided his. No one dared confront the freezing, treacherous water. Don't! Don't do it! Someone shouted as Ethan tore off his coat and plunged toward the riverbank. The water was like needles piercing his skin. Ethan's body immediately seized up as he submerged himself. The thin layer of ice on the surface cracked with sharp, shattering sounds. The car was almost entirely submerged now, with only a small portion still visible above the water. He swam toward the vehicle, his muscles screaming as the cold tightened its grip on him. Come on, you can't give up, Ethan muttered through gasping breaths. Each stroke felt like a monumental effort, but he didn't stop. As he reached the car, Ethan saw the girl through the foggy glass. Her wide eyes were filled with tears, fear, and desperation. Ethan pounded on the window, but it wouldn't budge. Time was slipping away. Hold on, sweetheart, he yelled through the glass, though he wasn't sure she could hear him. Using his elbow, then his fist, he struck the window harder and harder. The glass finally cracked. Water rushed into the car as Ethan reached in and pulled the girl from her seat. The journey back to the riverbank was a nightmare. The current tugged at Ethan, making him feel like he was about to be swallowed whole, but he held the girl tightly, keeping her head above water as best he could. When Ethan finally reached the shore, onlookers helped pull both of them out. The girl was unconscious, but the faint rise and fall of her chest was a sign of life. Ethan collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air, utterly drained. Someone called for an ambulance, and as they arrived, Ethan sat up, handing the girl over to the medics. Not a single word of thanks came from the girl's father, nor a single glance of encouragement from the crowd. Only the biting cold wind and an empty ache filled Ethan's chest. But he didn't care. He stood up and looked at his watch. It was past 8 a.m. There was no doubt. He was late. Ethan hurried down the street, his clothes soaking wet, each step feeling as heavy as if the weight of the world pressed down on him. His old shirt clung to his skin, amplifying the biting chill of the morning. Every breath he exhaled turned into a visible puff of mist. He didn't let himself dwell on what awaited him at the warehouse. When he arrived, the clock on the wall read 8:25. Ethan stopped in front of the large metal door, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The creaking hinges drew the attention of a few coworkers working inside. Several of them turned to look at Ethan from head to toe, their eyes filled with curiosity and judgment. Ethan, over here, a deep, gruff voice called from the small office at the back of the warehouse. Mr. Harris, the stern and burly manager with a perpetually flushed face, stood there, hands on his hips. Ethan walked over, water dripping from his clothes and forming a trail on the floor. Mr. Harris eyed him up and down, his narrowed gaze brimming with irritation. What do you think this is? A public swimming pool? He barked. I'm sorry, I was late because... Ethan started, but Mr. Harris cut him off before he could finish. I don't want to hear excuses, Mr. Harris roared. How many times have you been late now, huh? I warned you before. This job requires professionalism, not your personal sob stories. Ethan forced himself to stay calm, though anger flared in his chest. I didn't mean to be late. There was an accident this morning. A little girl was trapped in a car. I couldn't just leave her there. Mr. Harris scoffed, his expression dripping with mockery. So now you're playing hero? Fine, but I don't pay heroes here. I pay people who show up on time and work hard. And you, Ethan, are neither. But I saved a child's life, Ethan said, his voice pleading. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Mean anything? Mr. Harris sneered, stepping closer, his eyes cold. Don't bring your sob stories here to justify your incompetence. This time, I'm docking your entire day's pay. Next time, you won't have a job here. Do you understand? Ethan lowered his head, his fists clenched tightly. He wanted to say something, to fight back, but the words stuck in his throat. He needed this job. Liam needed it. The work at the warehouse that day felt heavier than ever. Each time Ethan bent down to lift a crate, Mr. Harris's words echoed in his mind, cutting into his pride like a sharp blade. His body hadn't fully warmed up, and every movement sent waves of pain through his sore muscles. When the clock struck 5 p.m., Ethan was finally allowed to leave. He dragged his tired feet along the road home, his mind clouded with thoughts of Liam. How much longer can I endure this? He wondered, but no answer came. As Ethan reached home, he heard soft giggles coming from inside. Opening the door, he saw Liam sitting on the floor, playing with a small toy car that Ethan didn't recognize. The boy looked up, his face lighting up with joy at the sight of his father. "Dad, you're home a little earlier today," Liam exclaimed. Ethan forced a smile, hiding the exhaustion etched on his face. "Yeah, I tried to come back early to have dinner with you." "Dad, guess what? This morning I saw on TV a man saved a little girl from a sinking car. I think that man looked like you," Liam said, his eyes shining with excitement. Ethan sat down beside his son, gently ruffling the boy's hair. "Maybe that man and I just look alike, son. I'm just an ordinary guy, not a hero." But Liam shook his head, his face suddenly serious. "To me, Dad, you're always a hero." Ethan fell silent, taking in every word. Those small, heartfelt words from Liam were like a lifeline, pulling him out of the depths of his fatigue. He knew he couldn't give up, not for himself, but for Liam. He couldn't let his son down. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. His body still ached from the previous day, but he didn't have the luxury of resting. Liam was still fast asleep in his small bed, his face serene and peaceful. Ethan sat quietly beside his son for a moment, watching him. For Ethan, every effort and sacrifice he made was for Liam. After preparing breakfast for Liam, Ethan stepped outside, a heavy weight on his chest. He dreaded facing Mr. Harris again. But the harsh reality was that he had no choice. "Just make it through this week," he told himself. But on his way to the warehouse, a sleek black car pulled up in front of him. The car door opened, and a well-dressed, middle-aged man stepped out. "Are you Ethan?" the man asked, his deep, warm voice carrying an air of authority. Ethan froze for a moment. "Yes, that's me. But how can I help you?" The man approached, extending his hand. "I'm Richard Sullivan. Yesterday, you saved my daughter, Sophia." Ethan was stunned. He hadn't expected the girl's parents to find him. I just did what anyone would have done," Ethan stammered. "No," Richard said firmly, his gaze steady. "You did what no one else was willing to do. When I was standing there, I saw the looks in everyone's eyes. They just stood by and watched. You were the only one who jumped in." Ethan lowered his head. "I couldn't just leave her. I thought to myself, if it were my son, I'd want someone to save him too." Richard smiled, but it was a smile filled with gratitude. "My family owes you our daughter's life. I want to thank you, not just with words." Ethan shook his head, his voice resolute. "I don't need anything, truly. I just did the right thing." Richard studied Ethan for a long moment as if trying to understand the man in front of him. Then he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Sometimes good people deserve help too, Ethan. Let me help you." Ethan stood still, feeling Richard's hand rest firmly on his shoulder. In that moment, he wasn't just the man who had saved Richard's daughter. He was a father, a single father fighting every day to protect and care for his son. Richard looked into Ethan's eyes as if trying to grasp the full weight of what this man had endured. "Ethan, you have a child, don't you?" Richard asked. Ethan nodded. "Yes, my son Liam. He's 8 years old. But he has a chronic illness. I'm doing everything I can to take care of him, but—" He hesitated, his throat tightening. He wasn't used to sharing his struggles with others. Richard nodded as though he had already expected this. "I'd like to meet Liam. If you're willing, my wife and I can help, not just because you saved Sophia, but because I believe no one should have to shoulder all of this alone." Ethan opened his mouth to refuse, but then he thought of Liam. His son needed medicine, better doctors, and above all, a future that Ethan wasn't sure he could provide on his own. That afternoon, Richard and his wife Emily visited Ethan's home. Liam sat on the small sofa, shyly watching the unfamiliar visitors. He wasn't used to having strangers in the house, but when Emily smiled and knelt down to meet his eye level, Liam felt a strange warmth. "Hello, Liam," Emily said gently. "I heard you really love to draw. Is that true?" Liam nodded, his big round eyes curious. Ethan stood nearby, observing every gesture. He still felt hesitant, but Emily's kind demeanor put him somewhat at ease. "Ethan, I know how proud you are of your son," Emily said, turning to him. "And I know you've done everything you can for him, but sometimes even the best people need a helping hand." Ethan looked at the couple, his heart conflicted. He was proud of his resilience, but he couldn't ignore the crushing weight of his responsibilities. I don't want to be a burden to anyone, he said, his voice firm but low. You're not a burden, Ethan, Richard interjected. You're an incredible father, but no one should have to bear everything alone. Let us help you. It's not just something we want to do, it's something we should do. Ethan finally agreed to let Richard and Emily support him. Slowly, his life began to change. They helped him transfer Liam to a better hospital for treatment. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he could finally take a deep breath. But the most significant part wasn't the financial support. It was the way Richard and Emily treated Liam, with care, love, and genuine affection. They didn't just help, they embraced him as part of their family. For the first time in his life, Liam had the chance to live like a normal child, to run, to laugh, to play, without the constant shadow of pain or medicine hanging over him. Ethan began to realize that his decision to save Sophia hadn't just changed her life, it had opened a new door for him and Liam, one filled with hope and possibilities. One morning, Ethan sat on an old chair by Liam's bed. Gentle rays of dawn streamed through the window, illuminating the peaceful face of his sleeping son. Ethan softly placed a hand on Liam's forehead, checking for any signs of fever. Thankfully, Liam's temperature was normal, and he looked healthier than he had in days. A knock at the door pulled Ethan from his thoughts. He opened it to find Richard standing there, a warm smile on his face and a box in his hands. Good morning, Ethan, Richard said. I brought something for Liam. I think he'll like it. Ethan awkwardly invited him in, still feeling a bit hesitant. Richard set the box on the table and opened it. Inside was a high-end puzzle set, something Ethan knew he could never afford. Where's Liam? Can I see him? Richard asked. He's still sleeping, Ethan replied softly. He hasn't been feeling great the past few days. Richard nodded. Liam is lucky to have a father like you, Ethan. I've never met anyone as strong and dedicated as you. Ethan said nothing but pride glimmered in his eyes. In that moment, he felt a deep sense of understanding and camaraderie from Richard, another father who put his child above all else. That afternoon, Emily and Sophia stopped by. Sophia ran into the living room, holding a small drawing she had made. The picture depicted two people holding hands, a little girl and a man, standing by a blue river. Uncle Ethan? Sophia called out excitedly. I drew this for you. Ethan looked at the picture, feeling a lump in his throat. This is me? He asked, a faint smile appearing on his face. Yes! You're my hero. I drew this so I'll never forget how you saved me, Sophia said, her eyes sparkling with admiration. Emily placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and smiled. You're not just Sophia's hero, Ethan. You're a hero to all of us. Ethan felt warmth fill his heart. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. The love and kindness of Richard and Emily, Sophia's innocent gratitude, and above all, the strength he drew from Liam. All these things became a beacon of light piercing through the darkness of his life. In the days that followed, life began to change. Richard arranged for Ethan to start a new job where he could have a more flexible schedule to care for Liam. With Emily's help, their small apartment was renovated, turning it into a cozy and comfortable space for the two of them. Liam grew happier and more active. He made new friends and received the kind of attention from Richard and Emily that made him feel like part of their family. One evening, as Ethan read a bedtime story to Liam, the boy softly asked, Dad, are we going to be okay? Ethan smiled, his eyes welling up with tears. Yes, son, I promise we'll be okay. For the first time, Ethan truly believed his words. Everything was finally falling into place, and for Liam's sake, he knew they were on the path to a brighter future. One evening, just as Ethan returned home from a long day at work, his phone rang. On the other end was Emily's urgent voice. Ethan, Sophia has a high fever and passed out. We're on our way to the hospital. I think it'd be best if you could join us. She's been asking for you. Ethan froze. Though they weren't blood-related, Sophia had long held a special place in his heart. I'll be there right away, he said quickly, instructing Liam to lock the door and stay safe before rushing out. The hospital was packed, its atmosphere thick with the sounds of crying and the chaos of emergency cases. Ethan made his way to the emergency room, where Richard and Emily stood outside, their faces etched with worry. How is she? Ethan asked, his heart tightening. Richard shook his head. The doctors say it might be complications from the accident. She inhaled too much river water and it's caused damage to her lungs. Ethan felt as though a heavy stone had been placed on his chest. He couldn't shake the memory of Sophia's terrified eyes as she screamed for help from inside the sinking car. If he had been a second too late, would things have turned out differently? Richard placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, his voice raw with emotion. This isn't your fault, Ethan. If it weren't for you, she wouldn't even be here. All we can do now is pray she pulls through. A few days later, a massive storm swept through the town. Ethan was busy cleaning up the damage to his apartment when his phone rang again. On the line was a manager from the new company Richard had recommended him to. Ethan, we've just received word that the main warehouse has been severely damaged by the storm. All the inventory has been destroyed and will need to shut down operations temporarily. I'm very sorry, but we can't continue employing staff at the moment. Your contract will have to be suspended. Ethan let the phone drop to his side, a wave of hopelessness washing over him. This new job had been his greatest hope for maintaining a stable life for Liam. Now, just when things had started looking up, he found himself unemployed again, facing yet another setback. Ethan sat quietly by the window, staring out at the rain as it trickled down the glass. His mind swirled with thoughts of the challenges piling up one after another. Liam's illness, Sophia fighting for her life in the hospital, and now the looming threat of losing his income. Dad! Liam's voice broke through his thoughts. The boy stood there, holding a piece of paper with a simple drawing of a family. Don't be sad, we're going to be okay, right? Ethan nodded, forcing a reassuring smile as he tried to mask the worry in his heart. Yes, son, I'll do everything I can to make sure we're okay. But deep down, questions gnawed at Ethan's resolve. Can I keep going? How many more trials will it take before it's too much? The next morning, Ethan resolved to search for temporary work. He couldn't allow himself to sink into despair. Liam needed him, and now so did Sophia. But in the aftermath of the storm, jobs in the small town were even harder to come by. The manual labor positions Ethan could take had all been destroyed by the storm. He walked the streets all morning, stopping at every shop and small factory he could find. But every place gave him the same answer: we're not hiring right now. The sun climbed higher in the sky, its harsh rays beating down on his shoulders. His clothes were soaked with sweat, and his old, worn-out shoes offered little comfort. Still, Ethan didn't stop. That evening, Ethan returned home, utterly exhausted. Liam was sitting on his bed, waiting for him. Dad, did you find a job? The boy asked, his eyes filled with hopeful anticipation. Ethan sat down next to his son, placing a hand gently on the boy's head. Not yet, but I'll keep looking. We'll be okay. Dad, you can rest for a bit, can't you? I'll be fine, Liam said, trying to sound strong. Ethan smiled, but his heart ached. This child was far too understanding, far too grown up for his age. I'm fine, son. I do it all for you. Ethan's life gradually began to stabilize. He started his new job where he was respected and valued. Liam received better medical care, and his health steadily improved. Most importantly, Ethan no longer felt alone in his battle. He realized that sometimes accepting help was also a form of strength. The new job at Richard's company brought financial stability that Ethan had never experienced before. But just as he started to feel that things were finally heading in the right direction, a message from the hospital sent his heart sinking. Liam's routine checkup results revealed that his condition was progressing more severely than expected. The doctors recommended transferring Liam to a specialized medical center in the city for better treatment. Ethan felt as though he had been struck by a crushing blow. His heart was flooded with worry. How could he possibly afford the enormous costs of such treatment, even with his new job? He had done everything in his power to protect Liam, yet it still wasn't enough. That night, Ethan sat alone in the small living room. The soft yellow light cast shadows across his weary face. On the table lay Liam's medical records. He opened the folder, and with each page it felt as though the words were cutting deeper into his soul. Dad? Liam's voice came from the bedroom doorway. The boy looked at him, his eyes filled with concern. Are you sad? Ethan took a deep breath, forcing a smile onto his face. No, son. I'm just thinking about how to make you better. I'm going to be fine, Dad, Liam said as he walked over and hugged his father. You don't need to worry so much. We always get through things together, don't we? Ethan held his son tightly, silent tears streaming down his face. In that moment, he made a quiet promise to himself no matter what challenges lay ahead, he would never give up. Not for Liam, not for the love they shared. The next morning, Ethan went to Richard's office. He explained Liam's condition and the challenges he was facing. I can't let my son go through more pain, Ethan said, his voice filled with determination. But I don't know how to get him to that treatment center. Richard was silent for a long moment before speaking. Ethan, I've told you that we consider you part of our family. I'll cover all the costs for Liam's treatment. And not just that, we'll help you move closer to the medical center. You don't have to worry about a thing. Ethan stared at Richard, unable to believe his ears. But I can't accept so much. I don't want to be a burden to your family. Ethan, Richard said, his gaze firm but kind, you gave my daughter a new life. This isn't charity. It's the right thing to do. Let us help you, just as you helped us. Ethan lowered his head, tears streaming down his face. For the first time in his life, he felt like he wasn't fighting alone. A few weeks later, Ethan and Liam moved into a small apartment near the treatment center. The apartment, arranged by Richard and Emily, was fully furnished and comfortable. Liam began his specialized treatments, quickly befriending other young patients at the center. In those early days, Ethan stayed by Liam's side, holding his hand through the painful procedures. But over time, Ethan realized that Liam was stronger than he had ever imagined. The boy constantly encouraged the other children at the center, smiling even when he himself was in pain. Ethan felt a deep sense of pride watching his son's resilience. One evening, as Ethan was reading to Liam, the boy suddenly asked, Dad, when I get better, what can I do to help kids like me? Ethan looked at his son, his heart swelling with emotion. You can do anything you want, Liam. You're stronger than you think. Then I'll become a doctor, Liam declared, his eyes lighting up. I'll help kids like me, just like the doctors helped me. Ethan said nothing, pulling his son into a tight hug. He knew that no matter what the future held, Liam would always be his greatest pride. The morning sunlight streamed through the large windows of the treatment center, casting a warm glow on the walls decorated with colorful drawings by the children. Liam sat on his bed, engrossed in drawing a new picture. It was an image of a car by a river, with a man reaching out to save a little girl. What are you drawing this time, Liam? Ethan asked as he entered, carrying a tray of breakfast. I'm drawing Uncle Ethan, Sophia's hero, Liam replied, his eyes shining with excitement. Dad, you know what? I want to tell everyone this story. We shouldn't forget what saved her life. Ethan set the tray down on the table and looked at Liam's drawing. His heart clenched as he remembered that fateful day, but now he also felt a sense of pride. That's a wonderful story, son. I think people would love to hear it. Liam nodded, his face full of determination. Then I'll write it down. You'll help me, won't you, Dad? Of course I will, Ethan said, ruffling Liam's hair. I'll always be here to help you. In the days that followed, life for the father and son began to settle into a steady rhythm. Liam adapted to his treatment routines, and his health slowly improved. Ethan, too, started to integrate into the small community around the treatment center. He often helped other parents at the center, sharing his experiences and encouraging them when they felt overwhelmed. One afternoon, while Ethan was fixing a stroller for a mother's son, Richard appeared. He stood watching Ethan for a moment before speaking. Ethan, have you ever thought about sharing your story? Richard asked. Ethan looked up, confused. What do you mean? I think your story, a single father fighting to give his son the best life possible, could inspire so many people, and maybe it could help others in similar situations feel less alone. Ethan was silent for a moment. He had never thought of his life as something that could inspire others, but as he glanced around and saw the hopeful faces of other parents and thought of Liam, he began to think Richard might be right. With the support of Richard and Emily, Ethan agreed to share his story through an article on the treatment center's website. In the article, he spoke about the struggles of being a single father, his fight to hold on to hope, and how saving Sophia had changed his life forever. The story quickly went viral on social media, garnering thousands of shares and comments. Many people expressed their admiration and empathy for Ethan. Some parents in similar circumstances reached out to thank him for inspiring them with his journey. Ethan was surprised, but deeply moved. He realized that his actions had not only saved one child's life, but also brought hope to countless others. One day, Ethan received an unexpected phone call. On the other end was a representative from a major nonprofit organization. We'd like to invite you to speak at a conference for single parents. Your story is a testament to the power of love and resilience. We believe you can inspire so many people. Ethan hesitated. I'm not sure I can speak in front of a crowd. I'm just an ordinary person. It's your ordinariness that makes you extraordinary, Ethan, the representative replied. You embody everything we admire: sacrifice, love, and courage. Please, think about it. Liam was the one who convinced Ethan to accept the invitation. The boy looked at his father with eyes full of admiration. Dad, if you do this, you'll help even more people. I'm proud of you. Ethan nodded, his heart swelling with emotion. All right, son, I'll do it. On the day of the conference, Ethan stepped into a large, brightly lit auditorium. Rows of seats were filled with parents, most of them single mothers and fathers, eagerly waiting to hear his story. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. He had never stood before such a large crowd, never imagined his story could draw so many people together. Liam sat in the front row, flanked by Emily and Sophia. The boy's gaze was steady and bright, like a small flame igniting strength within Ethan. Taking a deep breath, Ethan stepped onto the stage and picked up the microphone. Good morning, everyone, he began, his voice trembling slightly. My name is Ethan, and I'm a single father. The room fell silent. Ethan looked out at the audience, seeing eyes locked on him, waiting for his every word. He shared his story of the early days of struggle raising Liam alone, the fear of not being able to afford his son's medicine, and the crushing loneliness of having no one to lean on. But I never gave up, Ethan said, his voice growing stronger, because I knew that as long as I kept standing, Liam would have a chance. Everything I did wasn't because I was stronger than others, but because the love I have for my son is stronger than anything. He recounted the fateful day he saved Sophia, the moments of hesitation as he weighed protecting his own livelihood against risking everything to save a life. When I saw the terrified look in that little girl's eyes, I thought to myself, if that were my son, could I bear it if no one helped him? When Ethan finished his story, the room erupted into applause. Some people stood, while others wiped tears from their eyes. Ethan felt a newfound strength coursing through him. He hadn't just told his story, he had touched hearts. After the talk, many approached Ethan. One single mother with 3 children took his hand and said, You've helped me realize that I'm not alone. Thank you for sharing your story. Ethan smiled and replied, No, it's you who've helped me see that we're all stronger than we think. After the conference, Ethan received more invitations from community organizations. He was no longer just a single father fighting for his son. He had become a symbol of resilience and unconditional love. Ethan used this attention to accomplish even greater things. He started fundraising to support struggling single-parent families. With the help of Richard and Emily, he founded a nonprofit organization called Hope for Liam, named after his son, to provide financial, medical, and educational support to families like his. Liam continued to be Ethan's greatest source of inspiration. The boy steadily grew healthier thanks to advanced treatments and his father's constant love. One day, as they sat by the river near the treatment center, Liam said, Dad, when I grow up, I want to do what you do. I want to help people. Ethan looked at his son, his heart swelling with pride. Son, you've already been my hero, and I know you'll do amazing things. A few years later, Liam had made a full recovery. Now an excellent student, he actively participated in charity activities alongside his father. The Hope for Liam organization had grown significantly, helping thousands of families across the country. Ethan, despite becoming a prominent figure in the community, remained humble and grounded. He never forgot that everything he had achieved began with one decision on that fateful morning: the choice to save a little girl without considering the consequences. On a peaceful evening, Ethan and Liam sat on a bench outside their home, gazing at the star-filled sky. Dad, Liam said thoughtfully, if you hadn't saved Sophia that day, we wouldn't have the life we have now, would we? Ethan smiled. Maybe not, son, but I've never regretted it. I believe that when you put love and kindness above all else, you'll always receive something good in return. Liam nodded and rested his head on his father's shoulder. Under the calm night sky, no more words were needed. They both knew that their journey wasn't over and that every new day would bring fresh opportunities to continue spreading love and hope. Ethan and Liam's lives gradually settled into a phase of stability and happiness. Their small apartment was no longer a place filled with worry and hardship. Instead, it became a warm and cheerful home. Ethan spent more time with his son, attending conferences and managing the Hope for Liam Foundation alongside Richard and Emily. One day, Ethan received a letter from a young boy in another state. The boy wrote, "Dear Mr. Ethan, I'm a big fan of yours. I read your story online and it gave me so much motivation. I live with my mom and she works so hard to take care of me. I hope one day I can make her proud, just like you've made Liam proud." Reading the letter, Ethan felt as if he had been transported back to his own early struggles. It reminded him why he had started this journey, to spread hope to those who needed it most. Ethan decided to visit the boy and his mother. When he met the small family, Ethan saw a reflection of his own past with Liam, a mother working two jobs to make ends meet, and a boy doing everything he could to help his mom. "We're going to help them," Ethan told Richard upon returning. "Not just financially, but emotionally. They need to know they're not alone." Richard smiled. "That's why we have this foundation, Ethan, but you're more than its leader. You're its heart." Under Ethan's leadership, the Hope for Liam Foundation expanded nationwide. It provided not only financial support, but also vocational training programs, psychological counseling, and community building initiatives to help single parent families connect and support each other. Ethan frequently visited families, often taking Liam with him. Now a strong and confident young boy, Liam had become a living symbol of what love and resilience could achieve. Together, father and son continued to spread hope and make a difference in the lives of countless others. On a trip to a small town, Ethan noticed an older man standing at a distance, watching him intently. The man looked familiar, but Ethan couldn't quite place him. As Ethan approached, the man spoke. "You don't remember me, do you? I'm the one who cried out for help when my daughter's car went into the river." Ethan froze. "You're Sophia's father?" The man nodded, his eyes glistening with tears. "I never had the chance to thank you that day, but from the depths of my heart, I want you to know that you saved my entire family." Ethan smiled warmly, his heart filling with a quiet sense of fulfillment. You don't need to thank me. I just did what anyone should have done." The man placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "No, not everyone would have done it. You're a remarkable man, Ethan, and I'm so grateful you were there that day." Returning home after the long trip, Ethan sat down next to Liam. "Son," he said, his voice filled with pride, "we've come a very long way, but our journey isn't over yet." "Dad, what are we going to do next?" Liam asked, his eyes shining with excitement. "We're going to keep helping the people who need us," Ethan replied, "because that's what our family does, bring hope and love wherever we go." As time went on, Ethan became a symbol within the community. Those who had received help from him and the Hope for Liam organization didn't just see him as a hero, but as a friend and an inspiration. Every time Ethan visited a family, he brought not only material support, but also the belief that they too could overcome their struggles, just as he and Liam had done. One day at a large event organized by the foundation, Ethan was invited to speak. Liam, now a confident and energetic teenager, stood proudly by his side. Ethan looked out at the crowd, faces glowing with hope and admiration, and felt an indescribable sense of pride. "Years ago, I was just a single father, trying to survive one day at a time," Ethan began, his voice steady and strong. "But it was in those hardest moments that I learned when we place love and kindness above all else, we can achieve extraordinary things." He glanced at Liam, who beamed back at him. "Everything I've done has been for my son, but I've come to realize that this journey isn't just mine and Liam's. It's a journey for all of us, those who refuse to give up, who keep fighting for the ones we love." After the event, Ethan decided to expand the foundation internationally. With the help of Richard, Emily, and dedicated volunteers, Hope for Liam grew into a global support network, aiding tens of thousands of single-parent families around the world. Ethan received invitations to speak at international conferences where he shared his story and spread the message of love and resilience. Liam, now grown, decided to pursue his dream of becoming a doctor. He studied diligently while continuing to participate in the foundation's charitable activities. One day, at his medical school graduation ceremony, Liam stood on the stage and looked out into the audience. There, sitting in the front row, was Ethan, his eyes shining with pride. Dad, Liam whispered to himself, his heart full. I've made it. Years later, when the Hope for Liam Foundation had become a proud legacy, Ethan decided to retire to a small town to spend peaceful days with his son and family. Though no longer actively managing the foundation, Ethan was fondly remembered as the man who sparked a movement that transformed the lives of millions. One evening, Ethan and Liam sat on an old wooden bench on their front porch, gazing at the night sky. A gentle breeze carried the familiar scent of grass and trees. Dad, Liam said in a warm, thoughtful tone, when I look back on everything, it feels incredible. If you hadn't jumped in to save Sophia that day, our lives might have turned out so differently. Ethan nodded, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. That's true, son, but it taught us an important lesson. When you choose to put love and kindness above all else, you don't just change someone's life, you can change the world. Under the starlit sky, father and son didn't need to say anything more. They both understood that while one chapter of their journey had ended, the light they had spread would continue to shine and inspire for generations to come. Thank you for listening to this story. Don't forget to subscribe for more meaningful stories. Goodbye, and see you next time. The story is about Ethan, a single black father struggling to raise his young, sick son while facing financial and job-related pressures. One day, on his way to work, he witnesses a car plunge into a river with a little girl trapped inside. Knowing he might lose his job, Ethan decides to dive into the freezing water and saves the girl from a near-death situation. His brave act changes his life forever, as the girl's wealthy family not only pays for his son's medical treatment, but also helps him rebuild his life. Ethan becomes a symbol of kindness, fatherly love, and resilience, inspiring thousands of others. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching this video. We hope this meaningful story touches your heart. Don't forget to like and leave a comment to share your thoughts with us. Now, let's dive into the story.